Good morning and a warm welcome to today's HS2 live webinar, where we'll be focusing on our most recent exciting archaeological finds at our site in Coleshill in North Warwickshire. After the presentation portion of the webinar, we will have a live question and answer session. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible during this time, but if we're unable to answer your question today, please do contact our help desk. Details will be shared at the end of the webinar. Before we begin, I wanted to share some technical information. All lines are muted, so you don't have to worry about any background noise. We don't anticipate any technical issues during our event. However, we wanted to provide some advice should you experience any connection issues. If your feed freezes, wait for about 10 seconds as it will most likely correct itself. If this doesn't happen, use the leave button to exit the call and rejoin using the event link. You'll be able to use the toggle at the bottom of your screen to rewind back to where you left the call. You can also use this functionality at any point during the call should you need to pause for any reason. If there is a freeze or you disconnect and you're unable to rejoin due to a wider Microsoft incident, we will email you with further information. There is also a question and answer and comment function which you should be able to find at the top right of your screen. A recording of this live event on our HS2 YouTube channel after the event. Therefore, if all else fails, you'll be able to replay the live event in your own time. A bit of background about the HS2 route. HS2 will be the new high-speed backbone of our rail network connecting the city centres of Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds and London. Once fully completed, we will have built 345 miles of new high-speed track, which is equivalent to over half the length of Britain from Land's End to John O'Groats as the crow flies. When fully operational, up to 48 high-speed 2 trains with up to 1,100 seats each will be running every hour on the UK's rail network. This is a huge undertaking, Britain's first new intercity railway north of London in 100 years, Europe's largest infrastructure project. I'll now hand over to Stuart and Natasha, who will tell you about the archaeological works we've been doing in Coleshill.
Hi, I'm Stuart and I'm the project officer for Wessex Archaeology, and I'm normally out in the field running the site itself.
Hello everyone, I'm Natasha and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at Wessex Archaeology, and that just means I get to think of exciting ways to share what we find on site with the general public. So today our talk will focus on the excavations at Coleshill. It's an exciting site. We found lots of different archaeology there, including Iron Age roundhouses and cremation burials too. Today we're going to focus on the medieval manor house and the gardens, which are currently being excavated. So I have Stuart here who's running the site to tell us more about this, and as we keep excavating the site, we reveal more of the archaeology and more of the history. And through historical records, we can tell quite a lot about the history already. So it's great to see how those two entwine. The excavations are ongoing, so we'll continue to find out more into the new year. So to begin with, and to help everyone orientate themselves, we're going to look at a map of the site. So Stuart, can you tell us more about this map? Okay, so today we're going to be kind of talking about one area in particular. So if you have a look at the map, you can see the large blue octagonal moat on the eastern side. So today we're going to be talking about what we've been finding within that moat, primarily in the area of the dark green lines, which are where the building is itself, including kind of the outer buildings such as the pavilions, the drains, and our archway and possible square moat that we now have. In future webinars, we'll hopefully talk to you a bit more about what's external to the moat, but for today, we're just focused on the internal side. So which of these features have you found so far, Stuart? So we found quite a lot of features so far, but one of the more interesting ones at the moment is this one that you can see here. So this is my colleague, John, and he's travelling up one of our later phases of the house. And what it is a drain that you're looking at. So what we've found so far from historical sources and from the archaeology is that pictures we have of the house show guttering on the house itself, and then these gutters, they then feed down into the gardens themselves, and the gutters then they go into these drains and then transport the water from the roof into the gardens to help keep them well watered.
So what we're seeing is a really well managed area where they've put a lot of thought into it, and they've really thought about kind of how they want to keep the gardens watered and how they want to keep them neat and tidy.
So how far down have you dug to reveal this archaeology?
So in this area we dug down about 20 centimetres, but in other areas we've only dug down about 2 centimetres. So on this slide that we've got here, this was quite interesting. So we only dug down in this area about 2 centimetres. We're onto the archaeology, which is really quite amazing. So kind of putting a bit of perspective, normally when we do kind of a rural site, you're looking at maybe sort of 20, 30, 40 centimetres. In urban settings, you can be looking anywhere between 2 metres, 10, 15 metres of archaeology to go through. So here it's really shallow, which is quite incredible. But what we've also found is beneath the archaeology that you can see there, that we're having earlier phases. So what you're directly looking at is a cobbled surface leading up to the front of the manor house. So it's really hard to picture in this picture, but about halfway back is where the house itself is. And this area we're looking up is kind of the main sort of walkway, cobbled surface up to the front door, which is probably going to be a later phase. So we're probably looking at about 16 or 1700s. But beneath it, we've had a range of post holes, which are a lot earlier. We're sort of suspecting they could be sort of 14, 1500s. We're not really too sure what they are. We're not sure if they're forming some kind of avenue leading up to the front of the house, like an earlier way to segregate certain areas on the internal side of the moat, or if there's a completely earlier structure there altogether. And might then be like an earlier house on like next to the one that we already have. So we're still kind of sort of investigating this area, and we'll be bringing the machines back in at a later date to kind of strip this off further to have a better look at what the archaeology is.
And are you finding other examples of phasing across the site?
Yeah, so I kind of hinted on it a bit earlier, and what this image is showing is our archway, which is really quite stunning. And what we're starting to suspect is that we have an earlier square moat hidden beneath the gardens of the house that is currently kind of there. We think the octagonal moat is probably sort of 1600s, has been built around that time. But a lot of the archaeology we're finding is hinting towards something earlier, more medieval, as opposed to just being Elizabethan. And we found this archway, which the bricks from it kind of look sort of later 1600s, maybe 1700s in date. And they form an arch. So if you watched our last webinar, we talked about a drain that's about head height that seems to be going under the gardens. We don't know where. This is that drain. But we have a sneaking suspicion now that this might be the entrance to where our square moat is. So we're starting to potentially build up this picture that we have sort of an early house with a square moat, and then kind of somewhere in the 1600s, they've then backfilled that square moat, added an extension onto the house at the rear of it that then went onto the moat, and then they've dug this big octagonal moat around the outside to create kind of bigger gardens than what they would have had initially. So there's definitely kind of hints that we've got something quite a bit earlier, but we haven't got any definitive proof of it yet. So this square moat, it's still a suspicion. We still need to prove it, but I'm hoping kind of in the next couple of weeks we might get some evidence for it when we come in and strip a bit further.
And would the reason for changing the moat from square to octagonal be stylistic, or just kind of changing the purpose of it not being defensive anymore? Kind of, do you know any reasons behind that?
We think it's stylistic. We don't have any other examples. So this was a question that came up in our last webinar. We don't actually have any examples of any other octagonal moats in the country. I mean, we have some that are almost an octagon, but not quite. So it looks like this one is kind of probably the only one really. But what you get is the shift really in time. So kind of sort of the 1400s, 1500s, you get these square moats. Then as you're kind of shifting through time, the moats just change shape a bit. They become a bit more formal. So they may not necessarily be octagonal. They could still be different shapes. They could suddenly be rectangular or oval or something like that. But they do change shape, and it always kind of within style. They're kind of changing it to, you know, go with the times. And kind of the kind of way that I kind of describe it every time is, say your house now is red brick. Then 10 years time, suddenly Pebble Dash comes back into fashion. becomes what everyone wants, then everyone's going to suddenly put Pebble Dash on their house. So it's that same kind of thing where they've got their house, original one, but it's kind of falling out of style, falling out of fashion, and they've got some money to spend. So they're like, okay, let's revamp everything and change how it looks.
And have you found any other evidence of stylistic changes on the site? Have they added any Pebble Dash to anything?
No, so we haven't got any Pebble Dash on site at all, but we do have a pavilion, or we have a couple of pavilions which are quite interesting. So on the next image, you'll see one of our 2 pavilions. So again, if we go back to our previous webinar, we talked about having 2. And in one of the images from that, we showed you one of the pavilions. The one that you're looking at now is the second pavilion, as we've just got a bit further along with excavating it than the other one. And it's quite interesting in that it's really quite poorly built in terms of the foundation. So kind of what you're looking at now is those 2 kind of straight brick lines and then 2 kind of large pads of brick and sandstone. Now, they kind of indicate roughly where the building was. And what we're finding a lot across site is when they've kind of pulled it down and demolished it, a lot of the bricks are being taken away. And then kind of like the offcuts and bits they didn't want to take are just being chucked back in the hole. But we do have in some instances some of the brick left, and again it's really poorly made, and this is something that you tend to see in kind of these garden features around this time, or garden houses, that the foundations aren't well built at all. They're kind of quite ad hoc, they're not excellent because they don't need to be seen, whereas when it then becomes above ground and the area that would be seen, it'd be really quite impressive and quite stunning to look at. So kind of the boar or the bare bones of it would have been particularly brilliant, but the kind of the outside would have looked quite nice. And that's what we have here. And what's quite nice about both of them is that when you sort of stand in them, you can look down one of the large garden beds. So you'd be able to look out and see your hedgerows, you'd be able to see all your planting. It would have been quite a nice view down across your kind of gardens in that area.
And do you know what's happened to the pavilions?
So we've got, so we know that one of them we think has been moved to Ettington. So it's now actually a wedding venue that's been repurposed. So it looks like it's been taken down and moved over to there. But what we don't really know still is that if how it looks now is that exactly how it looked when it was here at Coleshill. And at the moment, the kind of floor plan that we have of our pavilions on site don't quite match the one at Ettington. And we kind of have a suggestion that maybe they have moved it, but then they haven't necessarily built it in exactly the same way. They've kind of changed it slightly differently to maybe suit what they have. So again, that's kind of talking about that stylistic thing of like taking something they already have, but just altering it to something different. So that's kind of the story of one of them, but we don't know which one of the 2 it is. And then the second one we think has probably ended up in the moat. So it looks like when they were demolishing them as part of the kind of clearance of the site, that they would have taken a lot of bricks, but some of them also, or some of the bricks and nice bits of sandstone have ended up in the moat. So just down from this picture, we've got some really nice bits of cast stone, which are kind of probably about that size, really nice curves on them, brilliantly decorated. And it really shows a lot of skill that went into them and a lot of money to get kind of quality stone like that. So yeah, they're really interesting.
And have you found anything else then in the moat?
Yeah, so we've got something quite interesting again, quite exciting. So what we're looking at now is the wooden revetment. So this is just on one corner of the moat. So we're looking at the northeastern corner. And what it appears to be is that they have this octagonal moat, and then over time it silts up, it gets a lot of waste in it. So you would have to clear it out, you'd have to recut it just to make the water flow again. And it looks like what's happened is that they've had this octagonal moat, it's been great. Over time it's silted up, but then when they've come to recut it, they found that on one side the soil isn't particularly stable, and if they'd taken it away, it might then damage the gardens or damage kind of the inside area of the gardens, which you wouldn't really want to happen. So what they've then gone and done is placed multiple wooden posts right along one edge of it, just to hold all that soil back. And what we're going to be looking at doing is sending this wood off, or some of it off, for dendro dating or radiocarbon dating to see if either of them can give us a date for when it was in the ground, which would be quite exciting to see if we can date it. But the preservation is incredible. Like some of the posts, they still look fresh. Like imagine now when you've got like a piece of wood that's got that really nice kind of golden brown, we still have that colour coming through. Where it's been perfectly preserved by the waterlogged conditions. And generally speaking, we don't get wood on site because of kind of acidic conditions. The ground's dry, so it just rots away. But the conditions that we have here, where there's no oxygen in the soil and it's waterlogged, it's been brilliant for us because the preservation's been incredible. And we did actually find a leather shoe in that area as well, but we're still waiting to hear back a date for that.
When you mentioned the revetment, Stuart, what does the revetment itself refer to? So
the revetment is kind of the terminology we use to describe kind of what the line of posts are. So it's revetting the posts are revetting the soil back. So the revetment is kind of a structure that holds the soil back on one side. So we actually do have a couple of other examples of that on site where we actually have red brick and sandstone used as revetments to hold up kind of courtyards and other areas of the site, but in this case it's a long line of posts that are used to hold up soil behind them.
And what's your latest discovery on site?
So this is kind of the really exciting thing. So yeah, it's rare that you kind of, I mean, you get excited all the time, but it's rare you get really excited. And kind of we're really excited at the moment for what we found. So you might have seen earlier in the webinar, we called it the medieval manor house at Coleshill. Previously we've kind of described it as the Elizabethan house, and we still kind of refer to certain areas as Elizabethan. And it was always assumed that kind of from what the images of the house showed from the drawings from the 16 and 1700s, that the house was just Elizabethan. There might not have been anything before it. But because we have this square moat, we've kind of had an inclination more's going on. And what we found here is a gatehouse for the house itself. So this is a really, really sneak peek of what we've got before we reveal it all at a later date. But what we have is a very large gatehouse for the manor itself. We suspect at the moment, and again, this isn't definite, but we suspect we're looking kind of 14th or 1400s, 1500s in terms of the construction. And the stone is stunning. The money to kind of put into something like this would have been insane at that kind of period of time. Just the quality of the brick, everything is perfect in how well it joins. There's barely any mortar. I mean, it looks better built than a lot of houses you get today. It's really quite incredible. And what it looks to be is that you have, it's much like a castle, and I don't want to say castle because it's not a castle, but kind of when you have that big gatehouse that you would walk across a drawbridge in, it's kind of similar to that, where you have like these two almost turrets either side and like a big entranceway to then go into the courtyard where the house is. That's kind of what we have on a bit of a smaller scale. And for those of you that are kind of familiar with the area, Maxstoke Castle, that's I think sort of 5 miles away, something like that, near to here. They have something very similar. So again, they have like these two quite large turrets that form part of the gatehouse that go across this really nice bridge. And what's interesting is so far, it looks like what we have is very, very similar to what they have there in terms of shape. So if you're struggling to kind of follow what it might have looked like, if you go onto Google and type in Maxstoke Castle, have a look at the gatehouse there, that's quite a good example of what we probably have. But this thing is massive. And kind of the level that we're at there is really high. So we've done a bit more work since, and we know it's at least 2 meters high, the wall, and is still diving down. So kind of at a very later stage, we'll hope to expose a bit more of that. But what you can see, which is quite interesting, is kind of that little archway that you can see. So Natasha was going to have a guess at what that might be before I reveal all.
I think it might be a doorway.
So again, that's what a lot of us thought at the start, that we were kind of looking at a little doorway into the gatehouse. So if you look at this picture, just to kind of the left-hand side below where my colleague Will is, and that's the gatehouse curving around. And then to the right, the wall you can see there is kind of more of a large wall in front of the house, and probably more part of a larger kind of garden wall that goes to the sides of the gatehouse. But that little archway, yeah, it was suspicious. We thought it could be a doorway, and it was quite hard to stop people sticking their hand in and getting excited to see what they'd pull out. But now we've taken it down. It's not that big. It's only kind of about sort of 50, 60 centimetres high from the kind of top of that little arch to the bottom. We actually think now it's probably the poo chute from the gatehouse itself. So we're quite excited. I don't know if we should be excited or not to get digging there to see what we can find from the past and see if they've thrown anything else down the toilet that might help us date the gatehouse itself. So this is really exciting, and it's, I mean, I don't think I've seen anything this substantial in terms of archaeology in a long time. And this gatehouse as well, I've never dug anything like this, so it's really quite something special.
Wow, thank you, Stuart. And I think on that note, we will hand back over to John to do the Q&A.
Thank you so much, both. That's really, really fascinating stuff. As you mentioned, we're now going to move on to the Q&A session. So this is the fun bit. So we're going to have to manage, or I'm going to have to manage live questions coming in and then send them over. So let's hope the technology is still working. So just to remind you, there's a Q&A and comment function, which you should be able to find at the top right of your screen. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible during this time, but if we're unable to answer your question today, please do contact our help desk. As I said earlier, details will be shared at the end of the webinar. So let's see if the technology is working. Fingers crossed. Okay, rightio. Got a question that's come through from Sally, and I'll throw this out to you, Stuart, if I may. Can you tell us more about how you date bricks, the shape of the style or the materials, and can you tell a bit more about that, please?
Yes, I will. And I don't, if you give me 2 seconds, I've got a brick right next to me that I'm going to go and I can literally show you on camera how we do it.
Like Blue Peter style, this, isn't it? Here's one we had earlier. It's great. This wasn't planted, by the way, this question, Sally.
So we've got ourselves quite a good brick here. So there's kind of a few different things that we look at, and it's kind of similar how we look at pot really as well. So kind of hopefully you can just about see this. So the things that we look for, kind of the basic thing of the sizes, what's going on. So how long it is, kind of how wide it is, and kind of just the bottom end and what the size of that is. We do have technical terms for all of it, but I won't go into that too much. So we really look at the sizes of them, and we actually, although we record them in centimetres, we also sometimes record the inches as well, because a lot of times when they were making these bricks, again, we were looking at inches rather than centimetres. So sometimes they actually make more sense in inches than they do in centimetres. One of the big factors as well is trying to understand if they're handmade or if they're machine-made bricks. So in the case of this brick, this one is handmade. So it's I don't know how easy to see, but the edges aren't particularly smooth. They're not particularly equal. Whereas machine-made bricks would be kind of very perfect. They'd just be a lot more crisp. And what you tend to get with machine-made bricks is you get frogging. So if you kind of get the bricks today, you're on one side or both sides, you'll get like an indentation. So that indentation is the frog, and that will indicate it's a later brick. So actually on the site that we have here, everything is handmade, everything's a lot earlier, so we have no machine-made bricks at all because the house was pulled down by that point. One of the other things we kind of look for as well, so we look for the mortar on the brick itself, so that kind of white patch there, so that's kind of residual mortar on the brick itself. So you kind of break a bit off, you feel it, see what it feels like. Is it sandy? Is it a bit more silty? And we kind of look at the lime content. So what you get is kind of lime mortars or black ash mortars. So what they're doing is they're taking lime and they're mixing different materials into it to help create different types of mortar. And what's quite interesting about that is that you can see different phases of the house from the mortar. So if all the bricks are exactly the same, there might be different areas of mortar that would then help indicate kind of the different ages of the house. So we don't always just look at the brick, it's what's associated with it. And then as well as that, what we do is, you can just about see, we break a corner off and have a look at what's inside it. So what we tend to look for is like pieces of grit, we look for stones and kind of like the inclusions in it. So kind of what they're using to bond it. So clay itself won't work, so you have to kind of mix stuff into it to help kind of bind it and to stop it cracking. So in the case of this one, you might just be able to see it, but just on that corner, there's a nice little pebble in there. So some of these earlier bricks, they have quite large inclusions in them. Then the last thing we kind of look for as well is kind of the firing of the brick itself and kind of any patterns you can see. So again, sometimes what you see within that brick is kind of folding patterns where they've got the brick and kind of folded it, kind of like kneading bread into a mold. But you also get colour variation. So this one's actually pretty well fired, if I'm honest, because you've got a nice consistent colour the whole way across. But sometimes you'll get like a lighter orange and then a darker orange in the centre, or vice versa, and that can just indicate how well it's been fired, or even where it's been in the kiln. So that's kind of how we date a brick. It's just looking at all these different things and comparing them to different examples, not only on site but in reference collections kind of across the country as well.
Thanks, Stuart. I'll never look at a brick again in a without remembering all of that. It's fascinating stuff. On a related question, have you got any idea, this is a question, where the stone was quarried from and what type of stone is it?
It's a funny one. So in terms of the stone itself, we know the majority of the sandstone is local to this area. I can't say where it's quarried from, but say Coleshill Church, the stone is very similar to that. But what we have in the kind of what we believe is more the medieval stone is we're getting a lot of grey sandstone coming up as well that's been quarried and imported from somewhere completely different, and I'm not too sure where it is yet. But we'll probably take a sample of that to see if we can kind of get an understanding of, we won't be able to get the exact quarry probably, but we'll be able to get a rough idea of the geological region where it came from. So that's something we will be looking at to see if we can kind of narrow it down a bit more, but the majority is local stone. In terms of the actual red bricks, we know from historical sources that there was actually a field not too far from here, I think south of the manor itself, but I might be wrong, and that has the name Kiln in it, or Kiln Fields. It's something similar to that. So that tends to suggest where they're making red bricks or they're making pottery. So there could be indications that the bricks came from nearby because it's easier to use local source. But what we're seeing is a lot of the bricks are very high quality. So they might have had to go to a more kind of reputable or a better source for the bricks rather than just your local friends across the road. So they're probably getting them in from a bit further, but hopefully we might be able to understand a bit more at a later date when we go into the post-excavation stages.
Super. While we're on materials, Stuart, Joanna has asked, have we found any glazed tiles at all?
Yeah, we have, but not to the extent we were hoping. So what we've found so far in the house, and we haven't really started too much on it yet, that's kind of, we're going to go into the next month, we're going to start really on the house. We've kind of been looking at the outsides. We do have a couple of tiles that are glazed, but not whole tiles that are glazed. It's kind of like a bit of glaze that have been dropped onto it by mistake, as opposed to a whole tile that's been glazed. But we have suspicion that the level we're at is kind of beneath the floor level. So we think a lot of the tiles have been removed. But we did have a tile that came up the other day from a lower level that we kind of believe is potentially 13 or 1400s. So again, kind of going back to the brick, we picked it up and it wasn't like any of the other tiles we found before. And there was just something slightly suspicious about it that just made us think, hang on, that's not right. That's a bit older. There's something going on there. So we had it spot checked. It looks like potentially 1300s, 1400s. So although we haven't really got many glazed tiles, we do have kind of tiles from different dates already popping up.
Super. I've got some quite specific questions I'm going to ask now, if that's okay, Stuart. David has asked, how unusual is it to find such shallow features as such as the cobble path approach to the house?
It's pretty unusual. I think it's the shallowest archaeology I've ever found, that's for sure. But the primary reason for it is that when the house has been kind of pulled down, demolished, there's just been nothing there. The farmer's just brought his cattle in, and they've just been with pasture on that area. So it's just then turned into grass really, and the cows have just been on there for pasture for the kind of the last 200 years. So there hasn't been much in the way of kind of lots of trees or lots of waste being dumped on there to help build the ground up. So what you tend to get over time is like soil building up over a period of time, but that doesn't really seem to be the case here because we're talking about such a short period since the archaeology was kind of buried. So it is unusual, but it's not necessarily unheard of.
Okay. And Patty has asked that it looks like there was a pipe sticking out of the revetment of the moat. Was this carrying water from the River Cole, do you think, Stuart?
So yeah, this is one of the things that we haven't talked about so much yet, but some of the things we're kind of investigating. So one of our objectives is to understand, does that octagonal moat that we have connect to the river? And kind of early indications, the work we've done, we don't think the octagonal moat does. So in the area that we were looking at, there was a drain, there are drains that feed into the moat, but they seem to be more wastewater from the house itself, or those drains that we saw earlier on that John was cleaning up, that seems to be kind of gutter water just leaking in. But in terms of on the other side, so on the western side of the moat, we found it's quite nice. It's like a large drain, probably about that size in diameter, and it's made of quite an early brick. So again, kind of jumping back to this brick, it's a bit thinner than this one, so we know it's a bit earlier. And what we think is happening is, instead of the moat connecting completely to the river, they've got a couple of large pipes made of brick that basically allow water to flow in and out. But what's interesting is the height that they're at, the water won't be flowing all the time. It only appears to be flood water that would be able to come in. So it appears they've designed it so that when the flood, or when the River Cole floods, it flushes water in and then will allow water to come out to help keep the moat fresh. And it's quite interesting, kind of these things. So we've been on site now for kind of about a year, just kind of doing the archaeology here, and then previous to our evaluation, we spent a good 6 months pretty much working here. And you start noticing these things about the environment and kind of flooding and how that affects the landscape. And that's one of the things we picked up on, that the only way that that drain would be feeding water in is if there was a flood.
Super. And while we're on the subject of water, Stuart, I've got a great question from Sam. What will analysing a cesspit help us understand about the diet of people in the past?
It's a good question. It's not that quite my speciality, unfortunately. But what we can look at is for things like grains. So hopefully if the cesspit's there, and we do have cess still in good condition, and it's kind of, again, also hopefully being waterlogged, we can take samples of it as part of our environmental samples that we do on site, and they'll be able to kind of push it through a sieve, in essence, and see if there's any grains or anything like that that might have come through from what people have eaten. So we might be able to understand a bit more about kind of, you know, the crops that they have in the area, or at least the food they're importing. But quite interestingly, kind of in addition to that, there are some areas in the manor that we haven't actually excavated yet, and there's loads and loads of oyster shell and animal bones just in some concentrated location. So we think we might have the rough area of where the kitchens are. So it would be quite interesting to see if, you know, you've got a cesspit, what kind of materials coming out of that compared to what we're kind of finding potentially in the kitchens, to be kind of maybe give us a rough date or kind of a chronological order to things. So say in the cesspit that we were just talking about, you might find oysters, but then in the kitchen you find animal bone. So it might be that, you know, that cesspit's a lot older, and it's kind of gone out of disuse, and at some point their tastes have changed and they said, oh, we don't want oysters anymore, we just want to eat animals, along those lines. So then the kind of old waste from the kitchen would have just been thrown out, and then the kind of most recent waste would be the animal bones. So you can you can draw these conclusions. They can sometimes be a bit loose, but these are the things that we consider and kind of look at the diet and look what they have. And you tend to find, I mean, with oysters as well, like these days, obviously they're quite expensive and kind of quite sought after, but kind of during that period, they're not as high status, I don't think. And you do get quite a lot of sites. So actually, even with the Romans absolutely love oysters. So you get oyster shells on quite a lot of Roman sites, but you also get them on kind of other periods. So they've been something that have been eaten for years and years and years, really.
Fantastic. Obviously, archaeology and what we're talking about today has generated a lot of interest with communities and stakeholders. And a question for Natasha, if that's okay. Some questions about future engagement. Dave has asked, is there a plan to do a whole project presentation when the dig finishes? And a question about, is there a viewing platform or site where people can see what's actually happening on site?
I'm afraid we don't have a viewing platform on site at the moment. It's we're following government regulations when it comes to coronavirus, so we're not having any site visits. I think that's the same across all HS2 sites and all Wessex Archaeology sites. That will be reviewed as the regulations change, but I can't see that changing at any point in the immediate future. With Coleshill, we've tried to do lots of online engagement instead, so we can still share all our exciting findings with the public. So we've done quite a few webinars on Coleshill already, which are all available on the HS2 YouTube channel, and this one will also go on after. We've also got lots more things in the pipeline coming up, so we'll be doing another instalment to update you on the Manor House after Christmas, and we'll might be doing blogs, and who knows, we've got big ideas of things coming up, so you'll have to keep an eye on the HS2 Commonplace website to stay up to date, and we'll keep sharing everything, all our findings with everyone.
Super. I'm just looking through some of the questions now. I know we're going to be running out of time soon, probably squeeze in one more. Quick question going back to the water supply and materials, Stuart. Was the nearby river big enough to transport the stone up? Do we know?
So this is something I've been wondering for a while. So I've been working on this site for a good couple of years now. It's always been in the back of my head, the river and kind of the importance of it. And what's interesting is that quite a lot of the coal, not so much at the moment. It's not navigable at the moment at all. You wouldn't have much success bringing stone up it at all. But it does link onto some much larger rivers not far from here. And a lot of the other kind of smaller rivers in this area would potentially have been deep enough. So I don't think at the moment we have any definite evidence of the river unfortunately being deep enough. And it was kind of something I had hoped for, but I don't think we can definitely prove it. But what we do know is, looking from satellite images and LiDAR, that course of the river has changed multiple times. So there is still the possibility of it, especially because it is connected to larger rivers. But I can't say for sure. But one of the interesting things of the house that we're kind of still, again, putting pieces together is kind of why it is where it is. And we think the river is incredibly critical to that understanding, but we think it's more to do with the river crossing itself. So where the bridge is now, from kind of previous work we've done, we suspect there has been a river crossing in that kind of rough area for quite a long time, potentially back to kind of the Iron Age. And we think kind of where the house is at the moment is on a very slight rise in the landscape. So although a lot of the material is being dug out of the moat to help rise it up, it's still on a slight rise in the area. So it looks like when they've built the house, they've built it very specifically there because it can, it can look at the river crossing, it can defend it if needed. And then obviously it has access to the river itself. So it might give us an indication that the river did have its uses. But we can't say for definite if it is navigable or was navigable at that time.
Thanks, Stuart. Very quick questions just coming in. Does pollen survive in the waterlogged deposits? A question from Colin. It
does, hopefully. So what we do is we take environmental samples from across sites. So we'll be taking environmental samples from the moat, we'll be taking it from the gardens, we're taking it from inside the house. Anywhere really that seems to suggest that we might get some kind of evidence. What we found generally across the site so far as Enviro results, the soils haven't preserved them very well. But if you get quite large charcoaly deposits or waterlogged deposits, you get some really nice results. And one of the things that we're going to be looking for, along with the pollen, is kind of snail counts and the types of snails that are growing or were living in the moat and kind of that area. So different snails might indicate if the water was stagnant or if it was free flowing, or if we've got seasonal changes. So if the floods are coming in, we might be able to see those patterns. So kind of different snails will help tell us kind of the environment that was happening along with the pollen itself. And kind of early indications, it looks like we do have banding in the moat, which essentially means that you kind of have like very thin layers of kind of clay, sand, clay, sand, clay, sand, and that can indicate kind of seasonal movement of the water. Whereas have periods of kind of faster flowing and then kind of stagnation as well. So hopefully when we look at these more, we'll find out about the pollen. And we also take monolith samples. So monolith samples are kind of like long, big tubes, really, almost a bit like a drill sample or a core sample down from the soil, except that we just kind of push it up against the archaeology, and then one of our experts will kind of analyse it and see if they can see any like minute bits of build-up that we might not be able to see. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. So I really hope we get some good results. We had some indications when we did the evaluation that some of the charcoal remains that we get more internal to the house will be quite good in what we get back. And we had indications that there was kind of ground clearance, so they were kind of imagine a meadow, that the meadow had been cleared and then all that waste had been burnt, and then that burnt material had then just been chucked in a hole. So we kind of looked at that material and it looked quite promising to be able to tell us a bit more about the types of plants that are growing. So we're hoping to find more soils that are like that going forwards. And early indications is we might get some of them, but it's still early days, so we don't know definitely if we're going to get any results.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Stuart, and thank you, Natasha. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but thank you all once again for taking the time to tune in today and to all the questions. We've obviously got some questions we haven't been able to answer, but again, as we mentioned, if you want to submit those to our help desk, we'll try and answer them as well to you. As I said, it's really great. Thank you again for everything today, Stuart and Natasha, and I think more information generally about our archaeology is available on our Commonplace sites as well as HS2 website, and again we'll put that information out as well. So thank you once again, and take care and have a good day. Bye bye.